Let's start by giving you a little background on what RBC is and what their collection is and how this whole touring thing came about. First of all, RBC stands for the Royal Bank of Canada. Though actually this collection has nothing to do with the Royal Bank of Canada. It's a collection of what is now called a brokerage firm in Minneapolis, which is now called RBC Wealth Management. One of those very wonderful generic names for what they now call brokerage businesses. The brokerage business that is now RBC Wealth Management was the freestanding brokerage business in Minneapolis for years and years and years. It went through a number of name changes. And back in the 80s or 90s, I guess, when the federal government again changed their mind and said, well, banks can now run brokerage businesses, which back in the 30s, I guess, they said, no, you can't do that anymore, and broke them all apart. But they said, no, we were wrong about that. Banks can now have their own brokerage businesses. So how a lot of these banks got back in the brokerage business would buy freestanding brokerage houses. So the Royal Bank of Canada bought what was called Dane Rauscher in Minneapolis, and eventually changed the name to RBC Wealth Management. Dane Rauscher, back in the early 90s when they moved into a new building and had a relatively new CEO who was trying to kind of resurrect the company, one of the things he thought that should happen, and he was a man who was very interested in art and a collector himself, and what he thought should happen in the RBC offices, or the Dane Rauscher offices, was that they should have an art collection, and an art collection that really related to what they were and what they did as a business, which was help people. So they're all about public service, people service, helping people decide what they want to do with their investments and helping them plan their futures. And so it was obviously very people-oriented. But also being up there in Minneapolis, which was a fairly homogeneous kind of society, he also thought it would be nice to have a collection that was a little more diverse in its content, both and a diversity both in the artists that made the work and what was depicted on in that work. So they started forming this collection with that specific purpose, so that everything has usually a pretty direct relationship to the human figure, and again, then a diversity in artists and a diversity in expression, also diversity in media, I think. The collection, and that was, I said, the early 90s, so the collection grew over the years. I started working with the collection in 2000. And about 2004, 2005, the firm thought client relations are very important in these brokerage houses. And they do a variety of events around the year to promote client relationships. And again, this is the original CEO. He came up with this idea about doing events in the around the great museums in the big cities in the United States, New York and Washington, Philadelphia, and LA, when those museums would have like their latest Matisse blockbuster show or whatever. And so they would go in and take the museum over for an evening and have a dinner for all their clients in that community, invite all their brokers, and have a tour of the Matisse show. But then there was, as RBC Wealth Management, as it was now known, started to grow and develop branches around the country, some of these other branches that saying, well, but we don't get a Matisse show in town. What are you going to do for us in Cedar Rapids or Portland, Maine, or Yakima, or Teal was in Portland, weren't you? Yeah. So they came up with this idea, well, we had this art collection, RBC had this art collection, maybe we could use that somehow. And their first idea was, well, we could ship it into these communities where we have these branch offices and hang it up in the branch offices for a weekend and have a party and then take it home. That's when I got involved, and I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I bet in all these places there's going to be a really nice museum, university museum, a little whatever, that'll just love to have this. Besides, once you do this, it should be there longer. Maybe there's a chance you could get a little publicity out of it. And they said, ah. So anyway, we started doing that. We started that about 2005. And this, I think now, I keep believing this might be our 15th or 16th location. It's proven to be quite successful. Last I saw, they were looking into booking this up through into 2016. And I said, well, that's fine, but who are you going to get to come and speak? Anyway, so anyway, it's been quite successful. This collection, what you see here, the main body of it has been touring since 2005, though it's evolved somewhat in that time. One of the things we like to do is to get some of our newer acquisitions out on the road. There are a few more recent ones here. We work with the local staffs then to kind of finalize the choices and send them out, leave it up to the local curators to hang it, which is just fine with me, in fact, very desirable for a couple reasons. One, it saves me a trip. Two, it gives me an opportunity to see this collection through somebody else's eyes. And so it's always very exciting when you come in and see kind of the same stuff, but how somebody else sees it in juxtaposition with other things. It also is really interesting for me to see it in this kind of situation, because as Jill alluded to, it's not how it's experienced in the RBC offices in Minneapolis. All of you, I'm sure, have been in some kind of corporate office or a law firm or something, and which may have art, but you see like one piece there and one piece there, and then all the other, it's around the corner and down in the mailroom floors and up, you know, it's just all over the place. So you don't see it. You don't see it in its totality like this. So it's always great for me to actually see, well, there is kind of, it does kind of make sense, you know, it does look pretty good. See, I mean, that's kind of the general story. I don't know how specific you want to get on.
Maybe 4 or 5 works.
Well, we could start with, and I'll apologize for him beforehand. He's fighting a little cold, but so just ask him yes or no questions. He can nod or shake his head.
I'll try to do better.
But why don't we talk about his painting, which is right over here, and we can find a few more, and we'll be around, and you can ask questions if anything you see catches your eye, or Jill.
And as we're walking over, in case you were wondering, these artists are all really well-known artists. I mean, these artists are international. The labels are really helpful, the didactics, because they tell you background information on each of the artists, but they also tell you a little bit of how to get into the work itself. So we really worked with Don to try and make sure we had a great diversity of artists from around the world, ethnically, geographically, and also include some of the new pieces. But something that you should know, because they may not all be familiar to you, is that they are actually well-known artists, including this one.
Well, that's very gracious of you to say that. I might take exception with that.
I've known him for 35 years, so it's like he's been well known to me.
Yeah.
Credibility right there.
Well, I might be one of the least
But
well-known.
in the women's biennial, I mean, they have credentials.
I have had a career.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this painting is titled She, I, Queen. and it was made in, let's see, 94. At the time I was teaching at the University of Iowa, and the reason I was teaching at the University of Iowa is because I was in a professional crisis. The economy that had supported my work and allowed me to live outside of metropolitan areas and in western rural Minnesota had been deeply affected by market crashes in the art market. And that affects dealers in terms of whether dealers can survive. And if dealers can't survive, then artists can't survive. So as it happened, a dealer that I was showing with in New York went out of business, and when he went out of business, he packed up his gallery and left and didn't tell anyone. So the next morning, the gallery space was empty and the phone was shut off and all the work was gone, including the last 2 years of my work, which disappeared for about 3 years. So consequently, I had very little to work with in order to support my family. I was the sole source of support. And I started looking into teaching positions, short term, thinking that this would be something that would blow over and I would be back into the life as a self-sustaining studio artist that I was used to. And so I started taking short-term teaching opportunities at various sort of major universities, Ohio State University, University of Iowa. And when I was at Iowa, this whole issue of how I was dealing with the economic necessities of supporting my family, and it required me to be away from my family. So for almost 6 years, I lived away from my wife and children, traveling as a sort of itinerant visiting artist. And it got to be a very difficult emotionally, psychologically. This idea, I started to feel a kind of kinship with like auto workers who might be 55 years old and all of a sudden they have no job, and how do they feel about themselves? And so I was going through issues like that, like who am I, what did I do wrong, how could I let this happen? Very critical, self-critical. And so I thought, well, this is a time now when nobody's really looking at my work and I can do whatever I want to without fear of upsetting a dealer or upsetting collectors. So I just decided that I wanted to confront who I was by way of the things that were affecting me, you know, in my life with my family and internally, emotionally, psychologically. And I thought I want to make paintings that are just mirrors, in a sense, that seem like a reflection. And I thought, well, I don't want to make traditional self-portraits. I want to make fictional self-portraits that, to me, feel as though I'm that thing, not necessarily a person, but a thing. And so while I was teaching at the University of Iowa, and having come from a background of a studio artist where I'm not responsible for sort of mentoring anybody else's work, and I'm not responsible for conveying information, you know, outside of the information that I need to anyone in particular to help their process along, I realized that I was like ill-equipped, you know, to be a university professor. And I had to do something really fast to educate myself in areas, histories of painting that my then colleagues, my academic colleagues, were very familiar and fluent with, and I was ignorant of. And so I went to the University of Iowa Art Library, and I buried myself in painting history. And I discovered this genre that was fascinating because it was it dealt exactly with the opposite things that I was feeling with, that I was feeling like. It was a genre that was sort of loosely described as the swagger portrait. So the swagger portrait, swagger is, has to do with power and fluidity and confidence and all of that stuff. And that was the phrase that was used to envelop sort of all of the kind of classical genres of portraiture, court portraiture, political portraiture through like Rembrandt or. So I was looking at all of these different sort of ways in which the painter articulated that individual through material choices, through the touch, through the complex way in which the figure was invented, really, or transcribed, on canvas, and also was fascinated with the relationship between abstraction in that painting history and kind of classical illusionism. Typically, I mean, if you look at, I was always fascinated by the collars that were very common in 17th century, 16th, 17th century portraiture. And, I thought, well, this artist is insane. This is meticulously painted. I mean, it seems like it when you see the reproduction in the history books, but when you confront that image face to face, you realize that what looks like lace is drizzled paint a la Jackson Pollock, in a sense, is that there's really not, the only skill is figuring out how to make something look like what you want it to look like and not be the thing that you want it to look like. So with that in mind, I started trying to explore the languages that were being used in this genre, from Goya to Velázquez to Rembrandt to Gainsborough, Sargent, Whistler, all of those. And so I feel like I borrowed, or I feel like I stole, actually, atomic particles from all of those artists, and I tried to create a fusion of approaches that would ultimately echo who I felt like I was. And there's a partner painting. It's called He, I, King, and this is sort of vaguely a female figure. I mean, I'm also thinking about gender identification and the complexities of gender identification. So there might be a king and a queen, and they might both be the same person. And it might be me, and it might not be me. There would be a comparison. I'm going to show probably 10 paintings from this era when I do a presentation on Saturday, and then I'm going to sort of very briefly and systematically work to the present through a number of morphings of my studio process. And, so that's sort of the essence of this painting. I mean, there's obviously a gooiness to this painting that I really was fascinated by, these sort of veils of paint. And I think that Francis Bacon was also an artist that I was looking at very intensively. Anyway, that's, I think, all I want to really say about this painting. But I'm just very happy to be included in this exhibition. And like Don said, we've known each other for 35 years. And I hope that the fact that I'm in this exhibition is not simply an act of nepotism, but to be in an exhibition with Kerry James Marshall and John Baldessari and Chuck Close and John Ahern and all these really terrific figural artists is just a real honor. So yes.
Was this then the first of the series? Was this the breakthrough self-portrait?
I think it, yeah, I think it was. Oh, I do have another anecdote. Yeah, it was. The She-I Queen, He-I King were the first two. And coincidentally, the University of Iowa art faculty exhibition was being held as I was working on this body of work, and I had these two paintings, you know, sort of finished. And I included them in, I was asked to contribute, you know, as a visiting artist to that exhibition, and I contributed those two paintings. And the next day there was a review in the Iowa Press Citizen newspaper, you know, where the art critic said that what he had to say about my paintings was that they were so ugly they were virtually unviewable. And I mean, I've never had that response to my work before, so I thought there's a breakthrough that now I'm proud of this, because I, you know,
Finally got a response.
if I can offend as many people as possible, it's just like,
Any press is good press.
exactly right.
It wasn't, I mean, this was a whole, when I saw this, it was at Martin's, and wasn't
Yeah.
there was a whole series, right?
Yeah.
That whole show was. Right. So you had this gallery show in Minneapolis, and I don't know how many,
Dozens
of paintings that were just the same, same shape, framed the same way. I mean, this is TL's frame. And I think what he was after was, you know, you see these, the portraits that he was talking about with people, they all have these very, you know, the frames are very heavy, very organic, very much a part of that. And I believe he wanted to express the same kind of feeling, but in a little more
yeah, it's a modern take on a Baroque frame.
Yeah.
I didn't build these frames, but I did like design them. They were built by a cabinet maker, a fine furniture maker in Minneapolis, and fortunately my dealer at the time sprung for the cost of the frames, which I then paid back in sales. But that's the idea of the frame. I mean, I'd never framed a painting before in my life. You know, I just didn't think that it was appropriate for contemporary artworks at that point to have frames on them. It's sort of put them in a cast that I didn't want to be in. But in making these paintings, I felt like there was something wrong when I finished one. Like it just didn't, the space didn't read right. Everything seemed too flat. And I thought, well, what's the difference here? How come mine and that, well, it's the frame. Well, these paintings, the Baroque paintings, are framed, and you see them framed. So maybe it's the frame that helps to create the space. So I went to the lumber yard and I bought a couple of 2x10s, and I just mitered the corners and painted them black, and it was just a dummy, you know, kind of dummy frame. And I put it around the painting, and just, whoa! All of a sudden the space was three-dimensional, you know. Or far more illusionistic than it was without the frame. And I realized that, I then realized what that concept of the window, you know, painting as a window, and how that's embellished by the frame, or enhanced by the frame. So I started playing with that idea of the window, of the painting being both in there and coming towards the viewer relative to the physicality of the paint. And as my studio process has developed in the 20 years since this painting was made, that relationship has become more dynamic and more aggressive, more of a contradiction to the painting itself. So, yes.
Where is He-I King?
He-I King it's on a roll. It's on a roll with literally all the rest of those paintings, and in a storage garage in Wisconsin.
On its way
They're
somewhere?
unviewable. They're unviewable.
No, I mean,
So RBC didn't purchase that one?
no, I mean, You know, it irritated me that they didn't purchase the entire show. So.
This is so three-dimensional as we stand by it. I mean, she is coming right at us now. You know, the teeth are coming out, and it's a mask light, but it seems to be animated. It's a little bit scary.
I'm glad you have that impression. I mean, not that you find it scary, but that it seems like it's alive somehow. That's what I was after. You know, I have not painted in this way before. I mean, there's a terminology that I discovered about Baroque painters, and let's see if I can remember the name of it. It has to do with the way that the surface is different from notational painting. It's called notational painting because the painting is described, the information, the imagery in the painting is described through gestures, individual gestures that might be different from one another and collectively, like in pointillism, only, let's say it's pointillism, only the points are different shapes, have different characteristics. They come together to make the image, which is radically different than sort of conventional Renaissance painting, which had to do with a continuous skin, you know, that there was a continuous flow. There was no real physicality to that work. There was great scale to it, but sometimes, but not great physicality in the sense of the topography of the painting surface. Yeah.
What was the style that you painted in before? What was the style you painted in before?
Oh, well, my work has and continues to be autobiographical, and I habitually create or created alter egos, figural alter egos.
More realistic.
No, not really. I mean, it's been described as neo-expressionistic. When I was doing it, it was described as neo-expressionistic or neo-surrealism or neo-something. Neo-new image, you know, painting. No.
So
But
it's about 25 past almost, and I'm mindful of your time. Maybe we could do one more work in here, Don? Any work you'd like?
Pick one.
And then we can go into the Schnitzer, and I think June will show it, talk a little more about the works in there. Okay, Lala.
absolutely.
This actually is one of the, well, it was done in 05. It was done in 05, and we probably acquired it
Thanks.
a few years after that, so it is one of the ones that wasn't in the original tour, but was added. Laila Assadi is Moroccan-born, U.S. educated, but a number of women artists, Muslim women artists today, are really dealing with that whole community and what it means to be a woman coming out of that part of the world. This is from a series that she did in Morocco, Women of Morocco. And when she went to Morocco and contacted women who would be willing to do this, because it's still violating a number of taboos, both photography and, as she did in most of this series, bared their heads and let their hair become the dominant factor. So in just both those actions, she's already challenging the existing conditions of that society. She's taken it even further by actually doing this writing, and this writing, it almost looks like it's on the surface of the painting, but it's not. It's on the surface of the floor and the surface of the wall and on the surface of these robes. And what it is, it's taken from Assadi's own diaries, and I have no idea what it says. It's in Arabic, and I don't know if that's important specifically, other than the fact it is her story. And what is really, I think, significant about it, other than it's quite beautiful, it is this it's a kind of an ancient calligraphic form of writing in Arabic, which is a restricted and traditionally male activity. So maybe the only one sense where the men were the secretaries and the women were not. But so even this writing form was, again, another violation of that standard traditional aspect of that culture. And combine all that to what I think is one of the really a striking, beautiful image, the combination of her hair and the robes and then this calligraphy. As it comes together, I think, quite beautiful to make this stunning image, which probably, again, is another, I mean, the whole idea of figuration in the Muslim culture is a violation. So she's violated a lot of conventions. It's quickly interesting about this. There's a number of different kind of media. There is a lot of photography, which I always kind of fight against because it's very easy these days to turn something like this into a photography collection. But the photography that's in here, there's very little of it that I think I would call conventional photography that doesn't look photographic. This is a photograph. That piece behind us there next to TL's piece. That's a photograph, though if you look at it very carefully, it's a woven photograph. Yeah, Odawu Bay is photographic, of course. The Kelly Connell down there. So there's a lot of photographs. The two, actually, that's an interesting one too. You go on and read that. There's the one that looks like the two women floating on the. Well, if you look at it carefully, it's the same woman. And what you know, with photography, you can do all kinds of things with it, especially today. So that's actually a photoshopped image of. So talk about, and that gets all into the idea of gender and identification and all those kinds of issues. Drawings, painting, that's actually wonderful. It's maybe the hardest thing to find these days is and TL, I know, always is looking for good figurative painters. And it's not harder and harder to find, but it's, every 5 years they say no one's going to paint anymore, but they still keep doing it. There's a beautiful painting over here. John Sensini, this gorgeous painting. This is Jill. Where's Jill? She left. She did. See, this is one of the things that I never thought about, because I never thought about these two together. She calls these her chair installation. So these are, backwards and forwards chairs, and kind of male, female, very painterly one, and very flat the other one, and
Most of these are life-size or larger. Is scale an important part of the criteria for what RBC Wealth Management collects? Does the collection also include smaller?
Yes, in fact, there's a number of, well, not a number of small things, certainly small, actually large things in a corporate situation sometimes don't work really well. They also don't travel very well. But now you got to find the right combination. You get something too small and intimate in a corporate situation, it disappears. So you need things that are kind of, you kind of notice walking down the hall. And
so when these were in the corporate office, they were just scattered all over. They weren't like in a gallery.
No. And unless there's another exhibition, coming up, right after, they go back, and some of them will go back up in the halls. And but yeah, that's really what it's about. That's where they came from. And
is this the total collection, or is there a lot more?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, the collection it's not really a big collection. The collection's about 380 pieces.
That's about a third of it?
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah. Sorry, no more time.
There's a number of reasons why corporations collect. Sometimes it's just simply an investment, in a sense. But there might be an attitude of the corporation in terms of how the artwork they collect is a reflection of their principles, their ethos, you know?
Certainly.
Does that exist here in this?
Yeah, and that and actually I've spent a lot of all my professional career working for corporations on their collections. I worked for General Mills for 37 years on their collection, which is now about 1,400 pieces. So, but then I've been able to work with some other companies too, and yes, experience this what TL is talking about. There are varying reasons that corporations collect art. Actually, pure investment is one that I found is not one of the at least they all like it when you can say, well, you know, we bought that, you know, 5 years ago, and now it's worth twice as much. And they say, oh, that looks pretty nice, but actually that's not a good investment for any company. They need to make more money than that, faster than that. But yes, I think especially this collection is really specifically about or trying to both represent RBC's values as a company and also help form those values. It's a way of certainly surrounding and that's why it's important to have the work in the collection throughout the corporation. And we move it as much as possible. So people get exposed, the employees get exposed to as many different ideas, contemporary ideas as possible. This is, you know, artwork coming from all over the world, from all different kinds of cultures and expressions, and it's really probably the only exposure a lot of RBC's employees or General Mills employees would have to come into contact with some of these other cultural ideas. I really believe that these collections can be a very important part of helping corporations achieve their goals.
So basically, the collection, because it travels, you're not choosing because of some geographic area where you have a certain population of people. You're moving it, so it is an educational.
Well, it's in Eugene because there's a branch office in Eugene. In fact, tonight they're throwing a big party here. They decide to use this collection for a number of things, and one is a way to go into these communities and not only show their clients what they are as a corporation, but also show that greater community where they have a presence. And I don't know how long the RBC office has been in Eugene. Some of these communities we've been to, the office had just opened up, and so this is actually a way of announcing RBC to Cedar Rapids or someplace.
Thank you so much. Well, what prompted that question was that I've seen this exhibition several times. And this is the first time I've actually thought of it as possibly expressing just simply a concern for people, you know? I mean, I'm not a corporate shill, you know, but I mean, almost every piece in the exhibition is a response to something that is terribly difficult, you know? A cultural situation, a human situation, you know, interpersonal problems. And when a corporation creates a collection that addresses that, it's in some way kind of comforting, you know, that, well, if I was going to be an investor, you know, I would say I would invest with this company because they seem to care about people. They seem to realize that people suffer. You know?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's always a hard issue. Is like, do you do this because you want to do that, or is doing that help because you do this? If you understand that,
right?
Yeah, and I think that's really why they started focusing on the human figure, because they wanted to show humanity.
Yeah.
You know, they wanted, and it's all its forms. And it's interesting. And as I said, I worked for General Mills. General Mills had 1,400 pieces. including numerous works by T.L. Solien. At least 2. A few more than that.
They've reproduced.
A few more than that. But in that collection, and a lot of corporate collections that I know about, depicting the human figure is or depictions of the human figure is very difficult to show. It's kind of funny because a lot of the general population, which corporations are made up of, want things that are more identifiable. They don't abstraction, and they say, oh, what's that, and what's this, and then you gave them some, a lot of reality, and especially a lot of artists are dealing with a reality that frequently isn't all that comforting. And so you say, well, how about this? And, well, no, not that reality. That's not the reality we want to see. And so sometimes I've found that figuration is hard to show in situations. I think what RBC did, they established this is what we're going to do. So this is what they have. And now it's a lot easier to do things there than I found at other places.
Philip Guston made, I think, a definitive comment on this issue when asked, why he was moving away from abstraction, in sort of his mid-career, to
very successful.
To this very, kind of problematic figuration. He just said, I'm tired of making paintings or being in a genre of paintings that people count money in front of. So it's just this sort of big enigmatic abstraction. It doesn't convey the kinds of issues that reflect, the sort of the difficulty of the human experience often.
Well, I know that Jill chose objects within the large, wonderful selection precisely in order to address some of these issues. And I know that our exhibition interpreters, many of whom are here, were so excited when they saw the imagery because it does speak to so much diversity. And that's something that we're really happy with and we think will play well to our community and hopefully to potential RBC.
We hope so.